Welcome to Sinister States.
It started as a mistake. One of those digital anomalies you're supposed to ignore that I was scrubbing through satellite overlays at 3 in the morning, half awake, half obsessed, chasing inconsistencies the way some people chase ghost stories. Most of them turn out to be compression errors, stitching artifacts, or outdated scans layered over newer terrain. Glitches pretending to be mysteries. I'd built a channel out of proving that, debunking the unexplained by walking straight into it. But this one didn't behave like a glitched at first glance. It was just a cluster of shapes high in the San Juan Mountains, sitting above the timberline where nothing but rock and wind should survive. The coordinates were clean, the elevation data rendered normally, but the structures, they didn't belong. Rectangular shadows, repeating angles, too deliberate to be natural. I toggled between map layers. Topographic, nothing. Modern satellite, nothing. Historical overlays, nothing. Even the outdated scans from the early 2000s showed untouched terrain, a blank expanse of alpine wilderness. But when I adjusted the contrast on a specific dataset, one that occasionally bugged out under certain lighting simulations, the shapes reappeared, clearer this time. Cabins, not ruins. Not debris. Intact silhouettes, clustered in a shallow basin just beneath a jagged ridgeline. A settlement that existed in one version of the data and nowhere else. That I marked the coordinates and cross-referenced them with every public database I could access. Bureau of Land Management records, old mining claims, hiking trail archives, even obscure forum posts from backcountry explorers. Nothing matched. No ghost towns listed. No abandoned settlements recorded. The mountain itself didn't even have a proper name. That should have been the end of it. A weird visual bug, interesting for a few minutes, then filed away with all the others. But something about the way those structures sat there, quiet, deliberate, almost hidden, stuck with me. Glitches don't persist like that. They don't wait to I planned a trip. Getting there wasn't supposed to be difficult. The San Juans are rugged, sure, but not inaccessible. There were established trails leading most of the way up, documented routes used by hikers and climbers every season. According to the maps, every version of them, I'd only need to leave the trail for the final stretch. That was the plan. Reality shifted about 6 miles in. The trail started normally enough, packed dirt winding through dense pine forests, the air cool and heavy with resin. Birds moved in the canopy. Insects buzzed lazily in the sunlight. It felt alive, predictable, familiar. But as the elevation climbed, things began to thin out. The trees spaced wider apart. The underbrush receded. The sounds, the constant background noise you don't notice until it's gone, started to fade. No birds, no wind through branches. Just the steady crunch of my boots and the rhythmic pull of breath in thinner air. That I checked my GPS out of habit. Signal was still strong. That I kept going. The timberline came faster than expected, like crossing an invisible boundary. One moment I was surrounded by stunted, wind-bent trees, and the next there was nothing but exposed rock and patches of stubborn grass clinging to cracks in the earth, and silence. Not the quiet of a remote place. Not the peaceful kind. This was something else that I felt contained. I stopped walking without realizing it, my body reacting before my mind caught up. There was no wind at this elevation, which didn't make sense. The sky was clear. No storm systems nearby. And yet the air sat heavy and unmoving, like it had nowhere to go. I pulled out my GPS again. No signal. Not weak. Not fluctuating. Gone. I frowned, turning slowly in place as if orientation might somehow bring it back. My phone still had power. The device wasn't malfunctioning. It just wasn't connecting to anything. That's when I remembered something I'd read years ago about dead zones. Pockets of terrain where signals drop unexpectedly due to geological interference or magnetic anomalies. Rare, but not unheard of. Still, it didn't sit right. I checked the compass. The needle hesitated. Then it corrected itself with a subtle, almost reluctant movement, like it had been interrupted mid-thought. I told myself it was nothing, just environmental noise. I kept moving. The ascent grew steeper, the ground shifting from loose gravel to jagged stone that forced me to slow down, to choose each step carefully. My legs burned. My lungs struggled against the altitude. Sweat cooled too quickly on my skin, leaving me chilled despite the exertion. But it wasn't just the climb. There was a pressure building. Not physical, not entirely. A sense that I'd crossed into something unmarked, something not meant to be followed. I tried to ignore it. Focused on the coordinates I'd memorized before the signal dropped. Kept my eyes on the ridgeline ahead, where the basin should be just beyond. That's when I found the marker. It stood just off the faint path I'd been following, half buried in a cluster of rocks, like it had been pushed there and forgotten. Weathered wood, gray with age, the surface cracked but still holding its shape. I almost walked past it. Something about the angle caught my attention, a straight line in a landscape of chaos. I stepped closer, brushing away loose dirt with my boot. It was a trail marker, not modern, not even close. The wood had been carved, not cut. The edges were uneven, shaped by hand rather than machine. Faint markings ran along its face, letters worn down by time, but still barely visible. I crouched, tracing them with my fingers. They weren't part of any system I recognized, no standardized symbols. No official insignia, just a name, if you could call it that, etched into the grain, and a date. 1887. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. There were no records of a trail here, no documented routes, no historical notes about settlements this high up in this specific region. The Bureau of Land Management kept meticulous archives, especially for mining operations from the late 19th century. Something like this, it should have been cataloged, documented, remembered, but it wasn't. I stood slowly, looking around as if the landscape itself might offer an explanation. It didn't. The rocks stretched out in every direction, barren and indifferent. The ridgeline loomed closer now, its jagged edge cutting sharply against the sky. And beyond it, just out of sight, was the basin where the structures had appeared on my screen, the place that wasn't supposed to exist. I checked my camera, making sure it was still recording. The red light blinked steadily, a small reassurance that at least something was functioning the way it should. Then I looked back at the marker. There was something else carved into it. Lower down, near the base where the wood had split slightly from age. Smaller, less deliberate. I crouched again, angling my head to catch the light just right. It wasn't a word. It was a shape, a crude symbol, scratched rather than carved, like it had been added later by someone in a hurry. Two vertical lines intersected by a third, uneven stroke cutting through them at an angle. It didn't mean anything to me, but it didn't feel random. I reached out without thinking, pressing my fingers against it. The wood was colder than it should have been. I pulled my hand back instinctively, a flicker of unease tightening in my chest. For a moment, I considered turning around, logging the anomaly, writing it off as an undocumented relic, and heading back to the safety of known trails and reliable signals. That would have been the smart choice. But I didn't come this far to stop at a warning I didn't understand. I stood, adjusted my pack, and turned toward the ridgeline. Whatever had placed that marker there, whatever had been here in 1887, was connected to the structures waiting on the other side. And if those cabins were real, if they existed beyond the glitch that revealed them, then I was already too close to pretend this was nothing. I took one last look at the marker, committing its shape and its silence to memory. Then I crossed the ridgeline and stepped fully off the map. The ridgeline broke like a curtain, lifting point one step, and there was nothing. The next, and the world dropped open. The basin stretched out beneath me in a shallow, unnatural bowl carved into the mountain, its edges too smooth, too deliberate to feel entirely natural. A thin layer of mist clung to the ground, not drifting, not dispersing, just sitting there, as if it belonged to the earth itself. And in the middle of it, the town.it didn't appear all at once. Not clearly. At first, it was just shapes bleeding through the haze. Vertical lines where no trees should grow, dark angles interrupting the pale gray of the mist. My brain tried to dismiss it, to file it under shadows and rock formations, anything that made sense. But as I stepped forward, descending slowly into the basin, the shapes held. They sharpened. Cabins, dozens of them. Timber structures scattered unevenly across the clearing, some clustered together as if forming streets, others standing alone at odd distances, like they'd been abandoned mid-expansion. Roofs sagged under their own weight, walls bowed slightly with age, and yet they were still standing. I stopped halfway down the slope, my breath catching in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. This place wasn't just undocumented. It was impossible. There are rules to abandonment. Patterns that time follows. Wood rots. Roofs collapse. Foundations sink. After 100 years, more, if the marker was accurate, there shouldn't have been anything left but splintered remains and scattered debris. But this looked like it had been left alone, not left behind. The mist shifted slightly as I moved deeper into the basin, curling around my legs without resistance. It didn't feel cold. It didn't feel like anything at all, which somehow made it worse. That I kept my camera up, sweeping slowly across the settlement, documenting every angle, every structure, every inconsistency. Cabins at approximately. I started, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. I hesitated, glancing down at my dead GPS before finishing anyway. Unknown elevation. No record of settlement in this area. Structures appear preserved. Preserved. That wasn't the right word, but it was the only one I had. The first cabin stood closest to the edge of the basin, its door hanging slightly ajar. I approached it cautiously, my boots sinking softly into the ground. There was no crunch of gravel, no snap of twigs, just a muted, almost cushioned sound, like the earth itself was absorbing the noise. That I crouched near the wall, running my hand along the timber. It was dry, not brittle, not crumbling, dry, like it had been shielded from the elements. I pressed harder, expecting the wood to give, to flake or splinter under pressure. It didn't. Instead, it held firm, solid beneath my touch. There were cracks, yes, long, thin lines tracing the grain, but they looked superficial, like scars rather than decay. I pulled my hand back slowly. That wasn't possible. Exposure alone should have reduced this structure to a skeleton decades ago. Wind, snow, temperature shifts. This high up, the environment was brutal, unforgiving. And yet these cabins stood as if time had slowed or stalled. I circled the structure, noting the details. Rusted nails held the planks together, but even the rust seemed wrong. Darkened, yes, but not eaten through. The roof sagged, but hadn't collapsed. The window glass, what little remained, was cloudy but intact. I moved to the next cabin. Then the next. Each one told the same story. Aging without decay. Deterioration without failure. It was like walking through a memory of a town rather than the town itself. Something caught between states, unable to fully disappear. That's when I noticed the silence. Not just the absence of sound, the absence of life, and birds circled overhead. No insects buzzed near the ground. Not even the distant echo of movement from the surrounding mountains. Nothing lived here. I turned slowly, scanning the perimeter of the basin as if expecting something to break that stillness, to prove me wrong. It didn't. The mist clung to everything, muting the world, flattening depth and distance until the cabins felt closer than they were, then farther away when I tried to focus. And then, a sound, soft, metallic. I froze. It came again. A low, drawn-out creak, followed by a faint, rhythmic scrape. I turned toward it instinctively, my camera swinging with me to the far end of the settlement, partially obscured by the mist. Something moved, not fast, not sudden, just back and forth. I started walking toward it before I could stop myself, each step measured, controlled, as if moving too quickly might break whatever fragile reality this place was holding on to. The sound grew clearer as I approached. Creak, pause, scrape, pause, over and over again. Steady and consistent. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm. The mist thinned slightly as I closed the distance, revealing a wooden fence running along the edge of what might have once been a central path through the settlement. And attached to that fence, a gate, or what was left of one. The wood was warped, the metal hinges thick with rust, the entire structure leaning at an unnatural angle. One side of the gate hung loose, detached from its latch, swaying slowly back and forth. Creak, scrape, creak, scrape. I stopped a few feet away, watching it. There was no wind. I knew that. I could feel it. The air was still, heavy, unmoving. My clothes hung limp against my body. The mist didn't shift unless I walked through it. And yet the gate moved, not violently, not erratically, deliberately, like it was being pushed. I swallowed, forcing myself to take a step closer. The hinge groaned again, louder now, the metal grinding against itself with each movement. I crouched slightly, angling my camera to capture the mechanism, to document what should have been impossible. No strings, no external force, just motion, back and forth, back and forth. I reached out slowly, hesitating just before my fingers touched the wood. For a moment, I considered stopping, turning back, because this was the first thing that didn't even try to explain itself. The structures could be rationalized. Preserved wood, unusual conditions, maybe even some unknown treatment or environmental factor. But this, movement without cause, sound without source. I exhaled quietly and pressed my hand against the gate. It stopped. Immediately, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd experienced since entering the basin. Like I'd interrupted something that had been happening long before I arrived. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the gate. It moved easily under my touch, swinging inward with a soft, controlled creak. No resistance, no hidden mechanism. Just a broken piece of wood on a rusted hinge. I let go. For a second, it stayed still. Then, it moved. Not with the same rhythm as before. Not the steady, measured motion I'd observed from a distance. This time, it shifted slightly, hesitated, and then settled into a slower, uneven swayed as if adjusting. As if learning. A cold sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I stepped back instinctively, my eyes scanning the surrounding cabins, the empty windows, the dark doorways. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just the silence. It was the attention. This place didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Like everything here, every structure, every object, every unnatural detail had been waiting, and now that I was here, it was starting to move again. I didn't notice the main cabin at first, not because it was hidden, but because it didn't stand out the way it should have. If anything, it blended in too well, set near the center of the settlement, slightly elevated on a shallow rise. It had the same weathered timber walls, the same sagging roofline, the same muted, suspended decay as everything else. But there was something about its proportions, wider, more deliberate, that marked it as different, important. The others felt like dwellings. This felt like a place people gathered. Or watched from. I approached it slowly, the memory of the gate still lingering in the back of my mind like a warning I hadn't fully understood. The mist here was thinner, pulled back just enough to expose the structure more clearly. as if something wanted it to be seen. The front door was closed. That alone made me pause. Every other cabin I'd passed had been partially open, doors ajar, hinges slack, as if they'd been abandoned mid-motion and left that way ever since. But this one, it was sealed, not locked, not secured, just shut. I circled toward the side of the building instead, drawn to one of the windows where the glass had somehow survived intact. It was clouded with age, the surface dulled and uneven, but still whole. That's when I saw it first. I thought it was just another distortion. Dirt, maybe, or mineral staining from years of exposure. But the closer I got, the clearer it became. Smears, dark. What did I stop just short of the window, my breath catching as the shape resolved into something unmistakable. A handprint, pressed against the inside of the glass. The fingers were long, slightly spread, the edges uneven where mud had dragged. Across the surface, there was a second print beside it, partially overlapping the first. As if whatever had made them had shifted its weight mid-contact, I felt my pulse spike, a sudden, sharp awareness cutting through the heavy stillness. These weren't old. They couldn't be. The mud still had a sheen to it, a dampness that caught the faint light filtering through the mist. It hadn't dried. It hadn't cracked or flaked away. It looked like it had been placed there minutes ago. I forced myself closer, raising the camera, switching to macro focus as I leaned in. The lens captured details my eyes almost didn't want to process. Fine streaks where the mud had been dragged downward, small ridges where pressure had been uneven, and beneath it all, skin texture, not perfectly defined, but enough. Enough to suggest this wasn't just contact. It was intentional. I shifted slightly, angling the camera to peer past the glass into the interior. The room inside was dim, the light struggling to penetrate the grime and the mist beyond. But I could make out shapes, furniture, maybe, a table, something low against the far wall, and dust. Thick. Undisturbed. It coated everything in a soft, even layer, dulling edges and swallowing detail. It lay across the floorboards like a blanket, smooth and unbroken. Except, my eyes flicked back to the handprints, then down, toward where the floor should meet the wall beneath the window. There were no footprints. None. No tracks leading up to the glass. No disturbances in the dust. No indication that anything had crossed that room recently. I frowned, lowering the camera slightly, trying to reconcile what I was seeing. That wasn't possible if something had pressed its hands against the inside of that window. If those prints were as fresh as they looked, then it had to have been standing there. It had to have walked across that floor. But the dust told a different story. It was untouched. I stepped to the side, pressing closer to the glass, trying to get a better angle inside. The smear of mud distorted the view, but the floor remained visible enough to confirm it. Perfectly smooth, perfectly still. I swallowed hard, a creeping unease settling into my chest. Okay, I muttered under my breath, more to hear something than to make sense of it. Okay, maybe there's another entrance, another way in. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't explain anything. The prints were on the inside. That meant whatever had made them was still. I cut the thought off before it could finish. Instead, I moved along the wall, scanning for another window, another point of entry. There'd a smaller pane near the back, partially obscured by a warped wooden shutter hanging loose on one hinge. I pushed it aside carefully, the wood resisting slightly before giving way with a soft, reluctant creak. The glass here was cracked, not shattered, just fractured enough to leave a narrow gap near the frame. I hesitated for a moment, then leaned in, angling the camera through the opening. The interior came into sharper view. A single room, sparse. A table near the center, its surface coated in the same thick dust. A chair pushed back at an angle, as if someone had stood up quickly and never returned. And along the far wall, something caught my eye. A darker shape interrupting the uniform gray. I shifted the camera, zooming slightly. A crevice, not natural. A gap between two planks where the wood had warped just enough to create a narrow opening. And inside it, objects, small, clustered. I felt a flicker of something sharp and focused cut through the fear. Evidence. I pulled back, setting the camera down carefully before reaching through the cracked window. The wood scraped lightly against my arm as I stretched, my fingers brushing against the edge of the crevice. For a second, I hesitated. Then I reached in. The objects were cold to the touch, solid, real. I pulled them out one by one, setting them on the windowsill where I could see them clearly. A coin, modern. The metal caught what little light there was, reflecting it back in a dull, muted glint. I turned it over slowly, my breath hitching as the date came into view. 2024. My grip tightened involuntarily. That wasn't possible. This place, this entire settlement, should have been untouched for over a century. And yet here was something recent, something current. I reached back into the crevice, retrieving the rest. A small plastic wrapper, crumpled but intact. A strip of fabric, synthetic, torn at one edge. Things that didn't belong. Things that couldn't belong. I stared at them for a long moment, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. Someone had been here, recently, not decades ago, not years. Now I glanced back toward the front of the cabin, toward the window with the handprints. The mud, still wet. The dust, still undisturbed. A slow, creeping realization began to take shape, threading its way through the confusion. Whatever had been inside this cabin, whatever had touched that glass, it hadn't come in from outside. And it hadn't left the way anything living should. I felt the air shift, not physically, but perceptually, like something had changed, just out of sync with reality. The silence deepened, not empty, expectant. I looked back at the items in my hand, the coin, the fragments of something recent and real, and then toward the door at the front of the cabin, still closed, still waiting. And for the first time since entering the basin, I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was being drawn in. I didn't go inside the cabin. Not yet. Something about the handprints, about the way they existed without explanation, held me just outside the threshold, like an instinct I couldn't override. Instead, I stepped back from the window, my attention drifting along the rear of the structure. That's when I saw the ground. At first, it didn't register as anything unusual. The earth across the settlement had the same muted, undisturbed quality as everything else, soft, flattened, almost preserved beneath the thin layer of mist. But here, it was different, subtle, easy to miss. A disturbance. The soil behind the cabin looked turned. Not churned like heavy machinery would leave behind, not scattered or chaotic, but shifted, as if something had been moved carefully, repeatedly. Over time. I crouched, brushing my fingers lightly across the surface. The top layer was loose, not packed like the rest of the basin. Fresh. I froze for a moment, my eyes scanning the area more carefully now. The disturbed earth wasn't random. It formed a path, a faint, uneven trail leading away from the cabin, curving slightly as it disappeared behind a cluster of smaller structures. I stood slowly, my pulse settling into a steady, uneasy rhythm. Someone had been moving back here. Recently. I grabbed my camera again and followed the trail. Each step felt heavier than the last, the silence pressing in tighter the farther I moved from the main clearing. The cabins thinned out, their spacing growing irregular, as if this part of the settlement had never been meant for casual use. The mist thickened again, curling low along the ground, clinging to the disturbed soil as if trying to hide it, but it couldn't. The path remained visible, deliberate, leading. I rounded the final structure, and the ground dropped away. Not gradually, not naturally. Just ended. I stopped at the edge instinctively, my boots skidding slightly on the loose dirt as I caught myself. In front of me, a hole, perfectly vertical, carved straight down into the earth like something had punched through the mountain itself. That I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a collapsed tunnel. It wasn't erosion. It was a shaft. A mine. But not like any I'd seen before. There were no supports, no beams, no remnants of scaffolding or reinforcement. The edges were too clean, too narrow, as if precision had been prioritized over stability, and the size, barely wide enough for a person to descend. I stepped closer, peering over the edge. Darkness swallowed everything beyond the first few feet. No light reflected back, no visible bottom, just an absence that felt deeper than it should have been. I picked up a small rock and dropped it. I waited. Nothing. No sound of impact, no echo, just silence. A cold sensation crept up my spine. That wasn't right. Even a deep shaft should have produced something, some delayed echo, some faint indication of depth. But this, it absorbed the sound. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay focused. Unmarked vertical shaft. I murmured into the camera, my voice quieter now, instinctively lowered. No structural reinforcement. No visible excavation equipment. Edges appear, carved. That was the only word that fit. Carved. I set my pack down, pulling out the 360-degree camera rig. If I couldn't see the bottom from here, I documented another way. My hands moved slower than usual as I secured the camera to the line, double-checking the knots, the connection points, every small detail that would normally be routine. Because something about this place, it didn't feel like it would forgive mistakes. I stepped back to the edge, holding the line steady as I positioned the camera over the opening. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I lowered it in. The line fed out slowly, the camera disappearing into the darkness inch by inch. The mist seemed to follow it, curling down into the shaft as if drawn by the movement. 10 feet. 20.30. I kept my eyes on the feed monitor, watching as the lens adjusted to the low light. The image resolving into something grainy but visible. The walls came into view first. Rough, uneven, but not in the way natural rock formations are. These had patterns, long, vertical grooves running parallel to each other, etched into the surface at irregular intervals. They weren't clean cuts. They weren't consistent. They looked wrong. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching. The grooves weren't deep enough to be tool marks from standard mining equipment. No picks, no drills, nothing mechanical. They were shallow, jagged, layered over each other in chaotic repetition, like something had scraped at the walls, over and over and over again. I felt a tightness build in my chest as the camera descended further, the image stabilizing just enough to show more detail. The grooves curved in places, bent at angles that didn't make sense for tools, and the spacing, too close together, too irregular. Like fingers. No, not like. Exactly like. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the line. That's, I started, then stopped. I didn't finish the sentence, because saying it out loud would make it real. The camera continued downward. 40 feet. 50. The light from above faded completely, replaced by the camera's own dim illumination. The walls seemed to close in slightly, the shaft narrowing just enough to feel intentional, confining. And then, the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't environmental. It was immediate. 1 second. The air was cold in the way high altitudes are cold, dry, thin, manageable. The next, it wasn't. My breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary reaction as the cold sank into my lungs, into my chest, spreading outward like something alive. I exhaled, expecting to see vapor. There was none. But I could feel it, the difference, the shift. The line in my hands went suddenly taut. I frowned, adjusting my grip. I hadn't reached the end of the rope. The camera shouldn't have stopped. I pulled gently. It didn't move. Something was resisting. Not pulling, just holding. I froze. The monitor flickered, For a split second, the image distorted, static bleeding across the screen in jagged bursts. And then it cleared. The camera had rotated slightly. Not by my doing. Not by the line. Something had turned it, just enough to face, down, into deeper darkness. And in that darkness, movement. Not clear, not defined, but there a shift, a suggestion of something existing where nothing should. The cold intensified, pressing in from all sides, no longer just in the shaft but around me, behind me, inside me. Every instinct I had screamed at once, leave. Now that I didn't hesitate, I yanked the line hard, breaking whatever tension had held it in place. The resistance gave suddenly, the camera jerking upward as I pulled it back with more force than I intended. The feed shook violently, the image blurring as it ascended. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something following it, keeping pace, but I didn't look closely enough to be sure that I didn't want to be sure. The camera broke the surface, and I grabbed it immediately, dropping the line and stepping back from the edge. The cold vanished, not faded, vanished, like it had never been there. I stood there for a second, breathing hard, staring down into the shaft. It looked the same, still, silent, empty, but I knew better now. Whatever was down there, it wasn't buried. It wasn't trapped, and it had noticed me. I didn't stay any longer than I had to. The moment the camera cleared the shaft, something shifted in me, something instinctive and absolute. Whatever line I had crossed coming into this place, I was now standing too far beyond it. I packed quickly, not carelessly, but without the usual precision I relied on. Gear went into my bag in tighter, less organized layers. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, driven by a quiet urgency I couldn't ignore. I didn't look back toward the shaft. I didn't look at the cabins. Not until I had to. The ridge was still visible from where I stood, faint through the thinning mist, and I kept my focus on it as I moved. Step by step, retracing my path across the basin, past the gate. It was still, completely still, like it had never moved at all. That somehow felt worse. I passed it without stopping, the silence pressing tighter around me now, no longer passive, no longer empty, aware. Halfway to the ridge, I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because something in my mind caught, snagged on a detail I hadn't processed yet. The footage. I hadn't reviewed it, not from the shaft, not from the cabin. If something had been there, if something had followed that camera up, I needed to know. I pulled the device from my pack, my fingers colder than they should have been as I scrolled through the recordings. The screen flickered slightly as the files loaded, the dim light reflecting back into my eyes. I started with the cabin, the window, the handprints. The footage matched what I'd seen. The mud, the shape, the impossible placement against untouched dust. I scrubbed forward, watching myself move past the frame, circling the structure. Nothing unusual, nothing moving. I exhaled slowly, tension easing just slightly. Then I saw it. I froze. Rewound. Played it again. At the edge of the frame, just behind the glass where the handprints had been. A shape. Not a reflection. Not distortion. A shadow. Standing just inside the cabin. Still, watching. I hadn't seen it at the time. There had been nothing there when I stood outside that window. But in the footage, it was clear, not detailed, not defined, but present. The outline of something upright, positioned just beyond the reach of the light, its edges blending too perfectly into the dark. Facing me. My throat tightened as I paused the frame, staring at it. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The implication was enough. I closed the footage abruptly, shoving the device back into my pack like distance from it might somehow undo what I'd just seen. That settled it. There was no version of this where I shared the location. Not publicly, not privately, not at all. I'd built everything on going where others wouldn't, showing what others couldn't. But this wasn't something people should find. There are places that exist outside the map for a reason. Not because they're lost, because they've been removed. I reached the base of the ridge and started to climb back up, my legs protesting, my breath shortening, but I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. The dead zone still held. No signal, no compass stability, nothing but memory guiding me upward. And for the first time since I started this, I didn't question it. I didn't check. I just moved. When I finally crested the ridge, the shift was immediate. The air moved again. Faint, but real. The silence broke. Not completely, but enough to remind me what normal felt like. I turned once, just once, looking back over the basin. The mist had thickened. The cabins were gone. Not hidden, gone as if they had never been there at all. Only the shape of the land remained, smooth and empty beneath the fading light. I stared for a long moment, trying to fix it in my mind, to confirm that I hadn't imagined any of it. But the mountain offered nothing back, just distance. Just silence. I turned away as the sun dipped lower, painting the jagged peaks in deep orange and shadow. The San Juan stretched endlessly beyond me, ridge after ridge fading into the horizon, untouched, unmapped. Or maybe unacknowledged. And I started the descent without another look back, one thought settling in deeper with every step. If one place like this could exist, how many others were still out there, waiting?